I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Katalin Bálint from Augsburg in Germany. I'll just say briefly, I met Dr. Bálint at a European-funded networking school in Amsterdam, which was entitled Film, Game, Emotion, Brain. And that was 2 years ago, I think, and then since then we've worked on a couple of projects, and we're trying to grow our research profile, which we're hoping that through this presentation and through some discussion and collaboration that we can grow it even more. I'm going to let Katalin say a little bit more about her own background in this project. I think that's everything for now, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some question and discussion. Sounds okay?
Yeah.
Good.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Bren, and thank you for the opportunity to introduce our project. Let me tell you a bit about my background. I have two majors, one in psychology, one in film studies. And since my PhD project, I've been trying to combine the knowledge of humanities with the methods of social sciences. In my PhD project, I tried to identify certain narrative determinants and personality traits that influence the experience of character engagement with fictional characters in film viewing. And after my PhD, I went to the Netherlands, where I could join to a project at Utrecht University and the University of Amsterdam. We studied the experience of narrative absorption, how we get immersed, enveloped, sucked into fictional stories. There I had to conduct a media comparative study. I compared film and literature experiences. And then from there I arrived to Germany, to my current workplace, where I joined the research group of Helena Bilančić, who is a well-known name in media psychology, narrative persuasion, and hopefully I can stay there and work on this current project together with Brendan and hopefully with other collaborators. The reason why I'm here today or during this week is that because we are preparing a study with Brendan, and I came here to actually edit the research material together with animation designers at IADT, and I will talk about the background of that research a little bit during this talk. All right. Let me give you the general assumptions of the current project. We believe, and a few studies have already shown, that fictional narratives powerfully and playfully motivate and improve certain mental skills that are relevant for social cognition. The studies also showed that some formats of fictional narratives can do this job better than others. What we would like to do in our current project and in the scientific frame of psychocinematics is to identify those conditions, those formal attributes of the fictional narrative that contribute to this improvement. What is psychocinematics? What do I mean by the framework of psychocinematics? It's a newly coined term. It's very related to media psychology, but the focus is on fictional films, so visual media, and it applies the methods of social science to studying the film viewing process. It combines many disciplines, among them psychology, neuroscience, that know a lot about the content of the mind, the nature of mental processes, and film studies that knows a lot about the properties of the visual material, the structure of the narrative, the nature of a fictional work, and formal presentational attributes. The aim of psychocinematics is the following. It wants to answer the question, how do mental processes of the film viewer relate to specific formal properties of the film. So it investigates the interaction between the film material and the film viewer. But why is it interesting for psychology, you may wonder. Let me just elucidate it with one example, with the example of affective neuroscience. That if you think about it, most of the triggers, measures in neuroscience and in affective neuroscience in specific are image-based or moving image-based. If you just think of the International Affective Picture System, or the reading the mind in the eyes, reading the mind in the films, these are all measures based on images and movies. The reason of this widespread use of images and moving images is that they can be manipulated very accurately, they are suitable for brain scanners, and they are considered to be ecologically valid as well. Which is nice, but consequently, these studies actually investigate mediated experiences, an interaction between the participant and the technology without really knowing what the medium, what the image brings into the emerging response. What psychocinematics can do is to actually investigate the role of the image in the experience, and also it can also give information on how these trait-like processes vary according to the attributes of the image, of the moving image. Here is one example. It's a picture. I'm sure it's familiar to you. It's a picture from the reading the mind from the eyes test. The participant is exposed to this picture and several others, and she has to choose among 4 possible emotions, whether it's surprising, joking, happy, sure about something. I don't know the right answer, but what I know is psychological studies have already shown that theory of mind, so this mental process of inferring to mental states of others, are reliant or influenced by the arousal level of the participant. Psychocinematics, on the other hand, showed that the size of the image influences the arousal of the participant. So it would be interesting to know, like, how the size of the image of the measure affects the response itself. It's a very important aspect when we think about cross-cultural studies or between subject studies, how we present these image-based material. All right, let me shift to the focus of our current project. In the center of our interest is social cognition and 2 main functions of social cognition: theory of mind, how we represent mental states of other people, and empathy, how we experience mental states of other people. On the purpose of time, I wouldn't go into the psychological background of these mental processes. I'm sure you know a lot about them. They are crucial processes at all levels of interpersonal relationships, and the decreased capability of theory of mind or empathy is a hallmark of many psychopathologies like borderline, autism spectrum disorders, schizophrenia, and so on. We also know that these processes develop in the context of early mother-infant relationship, and the quality of the attachment determines the later capability of theory of mind, for example. Well, what we know about early mother-infant attachments, that they can go wrong very easily, so there is a high need to come up with tools that can effectively improve these mental processes. So this is the psychological process in the focus of our research. What we know from psychocinematics, that when we watch a fictional narrative, a movie, or when we read a book, we try to relate emotionally, cognitively to the character. This character engagement is an umbrella term to all these relations: empathy, sympathy, identification, what we experience in relation to the character during a fictional narrative. What we also know, that character engagement is motivated by narrative understanding. If you think about it, you can't really understand the main point of a story without knowing what the character wants, what the character feels, wishes. That's the main engine in our understanding. It's important to know that narrative understanding, narrative comprehension shares common areas in the brain with theory of mind. So what it means when we watch a film and we try to understand the causal structure of a movie, both our narrative understanding and our theory of mind skills are highly motivated. No surprise that a few studies have already shown that being exposed to fictional narratives can improve these mental processes in real life. Studies showed that the more you read, the better your social cognition skills are, and they could also demonstrate that even one exposure to a literary short story can improve certain skills in emotional intelligence, which is a big thing, like just reading a few pages and you will get better in a very important skill. What they also found, that certain formats of fictional narratives can do this job better than others. They found that literary narratives have a higher potential compared to popular narratives and compared to non-fictional narratives. Still, these are really vague categories, and these studies failed to really identify that what is in the text that contributes to this effect. So, in order to address this research gap, we conducted a few studies to actually manipulate separate narrative tools, formal properties in the story, and see how it affects social cognition skills. We involved, in some of the studies, we involved viewer traits as well, and we investigated the interaction between viewer traits and message properties. In the long run, what we would like to do with all this knowledge is to apply all this knowledge to applications, interventions, in order to design scientifically informed narratives that can improve social cognition skills in form of serious games or interactive stories or persuasive stories. That's where we invite designers and other technologically more skilled collaborators to our study. Let me talk a bit about the first study. It was part of my PhD project, where I was interested in the interaction of personality traits and narrative techniques. I chose an easily manipulatable variable, voice-over narration, and measured the attachment style of the participants. It was a within subject design. Every participant watched 2 movies, and in a thinking aloud method, during watching the movie, I collected qualitative data and analyzed it quantitatively afterwards in respect to theory of mind. What I have found that voiceover narration on triggered more theory of mind responses. It's not that surprising, but it was a bit more surprising that there was an interaction effect between voiceover and attachment style. Highly avoidant viewers could mind read or mentalize with the voiceover on, but they could not mentalize with the voiceover off. And this difference didn't appear in the case of the low avoidant people. What does that mean? That certain techniques can facilitate people who otherwise are less willing to mentalize, and there are certain narrative techniques that can circumvent these very basic defense strategies of the viewers. In study 2, I worked with psychology students, and they were observing psychologists in practice. They were observing patient-psychologists interaction. I had 4 film clips which were almost identical, played by professional actors. In one case, the psychologist was empathetic. In another case, it was non-empathetic, and the gender of the psychologist also varied across the 4 film clips. It was part of a CD-ROM for educational purposes. Every participant watched all the 4 film clips, and in a semi-structured interview, I collected responses with open-ended question, and in the same fashion, I content analyzed the data. What I was interested in it wasn't just the frequency of theory of mind, but the complexity of mind reading of psychology students. What I found was the lack of complexity. Like, they had very simple ideas about the mental states of the psychologist, which was very interesting to see. And what I also found that a positive, empathetic psychologist didn't trigger too much mind-reading responses, which is an interesting fact to think about when we think about how to educate psychology students to be good psychotherapists. And what was the most interesting finding to me is the effect of gender match. Male psychologists didn't mentalize mind read with male psychology students didn't mentalize with male psychologists that much. They mentalized with female psychologists, but the male psychologist couldn't trigger mind reading response. So there was a gender match effect in the data. The conclusion is, again, that mind reading is not a trait like a mental process. The context very much influences the tendency of mind reading, And it was a study that is really applicable in film-triggered education and the education of psychology students. Okay, this was the first study, and from the third study we shifted focus, and instead of manipulating content-related aspects of the narrative, we began to focus on visual formal properties of the narrative. And one reason to do that is the fact that theory of mind has a strong foundation in the visuals. Neuroscientific research has already shown that faces, gazes are very important social cues that directly trigger theory of mind related brain areas. Processing gaze direction of someone also directly triggers a theory of mind relevant brain areas, and understanding the gaze direction is a prerequisite to theory of mind. People living with autism spectrum disorder has a decreased capability to understanding gaze direction, for example. That's why we thought that we should find a film technique, a narrative technique that regulates the amount of available facial cues in film. The technique of shot scale obviously do that, which is, as you see, these are the 9 different types of shot scales, from extreme long shot to extreme close-up, and the shot scale refers to the apparent distance of the figure and the camera, so, and the background figure ratio, so it's a spatial distance regulation. Interestingly enough, certain directors use shot types in a very conscious manner, and they have their individual distribution of shot types, and statistically you can see that certain directors only work with close-ups, others with long shots, and so on. Close-up is a highly theorized shot type in film studies. There is a huge amount of talk and theory. Why is it relevant? Why is it important in films? And I just want to show you famous shot close-ups from film history. Close-up will be an important variable in our study in progress as well. There hasn't been too many studies done on the effect of shot scale. That's why most of the information comes from other studies manipulating screen size, image size, viewing distance, viewing angle, and they all show that spatial distance has a motivational relevance. It has an effect on arousal, attention, memory, the subjective experience of presence, impression formation on the character, emotion regulation, and emotion recognition as well. It's an interesting finding that certain different emotions are affected by spatial distance differently. And if you just look at this picture, you might also experience that so the picture in different sizes has a bit of a different effect, and it certainly increases the arousal level of the viewer. In the third study, we manipulated spatial distance and shot scale, and we wanted to see how it influences the frequency of theory of mind responses. Participants watched 4 short animation movies. They were different in the average spatial distance of the character, otherwise they were very similar. Participants had to tell the story of the film after every movie, and we analyzed the mental references in the storytelling. We tried to control a few variables, as it was a bit within subject study, a quasi-experimental design. And what we found that the average spatial distance of the character from the camera predicted the frequency of theory of mind references in the storytelling in a linear, significant fashion. What it means that shot scale actually shapes how we remember, stories, and how well mentalized are the stories we remember. The findings of the study encouraged us to invest more energy and more resources into the next study, and that was where Brendan joined to the project, and David Quin, who is a lecturer at IADT at the animation department, and we wanted to have a true experimental design. All the previous designs were quasi-experimental, and we would like to manipulate the number of close-ups very precisely in the film scene, the facial expression of the character, and maybe emotional intensity as well. As it is a between subject design, we will control important theory of mind relevant personality traits, and we will measure self and other oriented theory of mind, and maybe theory of mind, the improvement of theory of mind as well. I would like to show you the research material as well that we are working on at the moment. This is the original, these are shots from the original movie. It's a short animation film from 2001, Father and Daughter. These are the 9 shots where you see the female protagonist in the movie, and how is her? Yes, this is the first shot. There is the female protagonist, and at the very beginning of the movie, her father leaves her. We don't know why, there is no explanation in the movie, and he goes away in the water. The movie shows the 9 following stages of her life as she keeps going back and back to that very specific spot, and she's looking at the water. It has a very clear structure, and you might notice that actually you never see the face of the character. It's always in a long shot. We see her from a very long distance. That's how the idea came that we should prepare new drawings, new pictures to this animation movie with the face of the character, and then we can very accurately manipulate the number of close-ups in this movie. And we were lucky enough that Brendan had colleagues who could do that, and here is the result. This is the neutral and the sad versions of the little girl from the movie, and this is the work of David Quin and Katie Scullion. And at all the 9 stages we have the close-up of the little girl in 2 versions, sad and neutral version, so we can manipulate facial expression and the amount of close-ups inserted in the movie, and we will start the editing today. So I'm really excited about this project because actually this is the first time where we can very accurately manipulate shot scale. So this is about the past and the present. I would like to continue with one more slide about the future. Like as we said at the very beginning of the talk, we are open for new collaborations, and we are looking for people who can make our project even stronger and better. And I would just like to show you a few directions what we are thinking of. One focuses on the media experience, whether media experience can be used as a diagnostic tool in psychology, and to what extent can we use fabricated images, and this kind of studies can inform us about that. We would like to improve the methods of data collection, how to do that more accurately, continuously, and going to deeper levels, maybe involve psychophysiology or brain scanning methods. This is also a very exciting direction. We may expand our scope from theory of mind to other important social cognition skills like emotion regulation, which would be very interesting for the both of us. And when it comes to applications and interventions, we need lots of creative people around us who can help us to exploit the power of fictional narratives, who can actually provide us with knowledge how to build an interactive story or a serious game. And we believe that designers, filmmakers are very good at designing emotion machines. They intuitively know what we actually study in this project. And we would like to also involve other formal features to our study. Next to shot scale, I'm pretty sure that there are many other very significant formal features in a complex stimulus that can be relevant for theory of mind. I believe that face recognition studies can inform our project very well. And when it comes to application, we are also thinking about the ideal target groups who should be targeted with our intervention, like adolescents or borderline patients or whom. So these are the directions we are thinking of, and I would like to open the stage to your questions, comments. As you see, this is a project in progress, so we are grateful to any kind of insights and feedbacks to this. So thank you very much for your attention.
Hi, thanks. That was really interesting. I'm curious, you mentioned about manipulating emotion and emotional intensity and so on. And I'm wondering, are you then measuring emotion subjectively? Are you asking people how they feel and actually taking a subjective measure of emotion? Or are you assuming that from your manipulation that a certain emotion has been experienced?
In the way we could measure emotional intensity is one tool is to manipulate music. There are studies in
yeah, I've read some of them, but but that doesn't measure emotion. That's your manipulation.
Yeah, that's my manipulation.
Yeah.
I think we would use self-report measures.
Yeah.
And I would be happy to use physiological measures as well, and of course do a manipulation check whether.
Yeah, because the problem is always when you can take, if you've taken the two dimensions of mood and arousal for emotion, you can take subjective measures very easily,
yeah.
And you get objective with galvanic skin response. You can get an objective measure of arousal, but I'm not aware of any objective measure of
Yeah.
mood.
Yeah.
So if you know of one, I'd love to hear it. I'm not aware of any, so it can be tricky, I think, to determine whether you actually done it or not. I mean, I'd be interested to talk about it because I find it very difficult.
Yeah, in respect to emotional intensity, I would be interested how it affects theory of mind.
Yeah.
So I would combine that with theory of mind measures, not really with mood measurements.
I think a really exciting thing about this project is that we can explore those sorts of measures as well. I think film is such a great tool for psychologists because what you can do is you can manipulate things in ways that are designed to move our emotions or our theories of mind, and it offers them a lot of control, but they can be highly realistic. So some of the discussion around measures I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because it's more maybe ecologically valid than some other manipulations, which are a little bit artificial. It's a little bit more kind of realistic, so it can be nice to try and have some control in there.
It can also be really tricky to try and measure people's conscious experience as they engage with something.
Yeah, because you have to stop them
because
too.
then it takes them out of the experience, and
Yeah.
we'd like to explore some of the ways to do that too.
I was going to say, in some of the work that we do on stigma and young people's response to peers who've got mental health problems, a lot of the interventions have used film, but I think that the kind of work that you're doing could be ideal for that, because you could be looking at what is the way in which it would be best to portray a condition that you're interested in giving people more understanding of, because I think that so far people have just, they've gone out and they've filmed someone or they've had somebody talk direct to camera, so there's no and all they do is they report that they used a film instead of one-to-one contact with someone who's got a mental health problem. So I think there's great potential to look at the way in which you portray someone else's life that evokes empathy with that person, that creates a greater sense of understanding. So I think there'd be huge potential for a whole range of interventions that are designed particularly for children and for teenagers. And it's not just mental health, there's a whole range of stigmatized health conditions that I think would potentially, this would be extremely useful for finding the very best way and the most ecologically valid way to portray information about someone's life. So there's great potential there.
Yeah, thank you very much for this comment. I only found one study that actually manipulated shot scale and measured empathy and willingness to donate to the victim. So, about an actual behavioral, and they found a significant effect of the shot scale.
Yeah, I think things like that, even asking that question. You see, I think a lot of the interventions haven't even asked that question. Like, does it matter how we film? I mean, they they just say, oh, we made a film, and it's not even that they have they don't present any information about the film. It's just a film. So I think there's great potential there, and I don't think anybody's, as far as I'm aware, nobody's done any work on it in terms of that stigma prevention.
Yeah, and that's a very good film, because you actually can see the real life effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Within the fictional frame.
And particularly because a lot of the stigma work, the idea of contact with somebody who has the stigmatized condition is seen as a very powerful way of changing stigma. Now that's fine with adults, and you've got people who can consent and who are fully happy knowing, revealing their diagnosis of schizophrenia and talking to people about it or something. But if you're talking about a 12-year-old or an 8-year-old who's got a mental health problem, there are questionable ethics in having them come into another group of kids and talk about themselves having a mental health problem, whereas something you could do on film would be amazing. And I think so film, particularly for kids, would be particularly useful.
Yeah. Thanks.
I'm just thinking, sorry. Okay. I was just thinking about shot scale from the point of view of, well, in reading, when you're reading a first person narrative, it would be a very close-up. But yet, on the other hand, while that helps in terms of empathy with the character, there can be certain times, I mean, for example, I could be quite close to the character but not be very clued in about what they're wearing if it's a historical novel, say. So I'm just wondering, has anybody compared, I'm thinking, for example, let's take one, like a historical novel like Testament of Youth, which a recent movie, where you could have people who had read it as a book, who saw it, because one of the things that struck me there was how good film was at explaining the context in terms of filling in gaps, because you could see what they were wearing and how they, you know. And can you test differences between people who, you know, say have only read the book, have only seen the movie, and the people who get the combination of having done both?
Mm-hmm.
Do you get an increase in understanding characters and motivation or identification or whatever, what you choose to operationalize? Would there be a difference across those three groups?
Yeah, there is certainly some media-specific effects. Actually, my last study in Utrecht, I haven't processed the data yet, but I tried to do the same, that taking a short story and taking the film version of it, there are many methodological problems with studies like this, like how to equal certain literary techniques to film techniques. You said that the first person, third person could be an equivalent of close-up, but it's maybe not. There is a study that investigated reading before watching the movie, or watching the movie before reading, and it found that reading before the movie increases enjoyment, transportation, so all these media experiences, if the movie is good, of course. One very important difference between reading and watching the movie is the mental imagery. So reading activates mental imagery much more. And I'm not sure what the consequences of that, but that's what we know from research.
I'd be interested just to follow up on that, because I think it's really interesting thing about the book versus the film. I'd be really interested to know, in terms of emotion and all that, what the effect is of the actors being good or being really poor. So like you read a book, and okay, let's say you read the book of The English Patient, okay, and it's all very emotional, and the emotion is all there on the page, and it's explained to you how the characters feel. And then you watch the film, and that was a good film, so it comes across from the actors' faces and their interactions, what emotions they're feeling, and you totally get it. And then you watch a really bad version of a book, I'm not going to name names, you watch a really bad one, and the actors are terrible, and their faces are really blank, and apart from the fact that they're maybe saying words, you have no sense of any emotion between them. So I think that'd be a really interesting way, maybe, I wonder of trying to examine what elements it is of the film that actually provide, kind of theory of mind, or like kind of a sense of empathy. Is it just the words that characters say and their physical actions, or is it sort of like other kind of non-verbal cues, like their facial expressions and their tone of voice and all those kind of extra layers and cues to communication? Are those what cause sort of mentalizing, or is it just the words and the actual story that's presented?
Yeah. And
it could be done kind of nicely by having a well-acted versus a poorly acted version of a story, and then seeing how whether even if the story is the same on the page, does the way it's presented in terms of the acting and so on, does that actually affect the kind of measures that you're looking at in terms of assessing theory of mind and mentalizing?
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have another kind of layer of things that might affect it.
Quality is a huge issue in media psychology studies. We are always concerned that our material is not good enough, and we try to control that. That's why it's very nice that now we work together with professional makers, so it's kind of ensured that it's going to be.
You're not relying on actors with your animation.
Yes, and I didn't stress that, but in this animation and all the animation that I used, there was no dialogue.
Okay.
So everything was conveyed by images, but it could be a nice study with a voice-over narration to put on the top of the film to see how text and image different in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I was struck by one of the slides you put up, talked about a new direction as being designer expertise, intuitive expertise of designers, I think. Yeah. It strikes me that when a filmmaker creates a movie, there is a process going on whereby they edit. And sometimes years after a film has been released, you get the director's cut, which suggests that somewhere along the line, the director felt it should have been this way, the studio felt it should have been that way. The studio wins because they have the money, and therefore the director gains revenge, ultimately, by releasing the director's cut. This is what I really meant. Now, if you take that point and look at the editing process, regardless of who's viewing it, looking at the editing process, and if you look at how someone edits a movie, you've got a case study of an expert who's a director, and if you could somehow explore the mechanism and decisions by which they intuitively edit a movie, you might find out, are they trying to clarify a narrative from the point of view of a potential future viewer, or are they being egocentric and selfish and saying, this is my story and I want it this way? But either way, without leaving the studio, you could explore how someone edits something and why they make the decisions they do. And by getting it at that point, you're taking advantage of a real life situation, and you're exploring a phenomenon of selection which has to do with narrative. Or you could wait another 30 years and find out what they mean.
Or, you know, use the perfect example, Blade Runner, you know,
Yeah, Blade
original
Runner,
one had
yeah,
a terrible
exactly.
voiceover,
Blade
and then
Runner.
the director's got rid of the voiceover.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we meant to say, that designers create emotion machines. They are completely aware of the potential of a film and how it regulates our emotion, and just exploring that decision-making process could be a great source of information. We are planning something quite similar to that, and our victim will be David Quin, the designer of. We want to conduct an interview with him tomorrow or today.
You've been working with David, because I know you're saying he's aware, and that you're saying that the directors might have this experience and they're making these conscious choices, but a lot of the time they're not able to articulate their reasons for those choices, or they think it's just working through trial and error. So we're really interested in trying to tap into that. But he just, like, it's funny because we're doing this from a science perspective, and he's trying to say, oh, you can't do it that way, or you can't remove that out, you'll ruin the film, and we're going, we just need a paper that, you know, that makes sense, and there's this tension.
Yeah, but the interview will be about, like, we want him to predict the outcome of the study. Just tell us which version you'll evoke the most theory.
But the point is that it's a real life process, and you know, it's been done for surgeons, for anyone who has a high degree of skill,
Yeah.
or who doesn't know how certain choices emerge. You unobtrusively record what they do and why, as best you can.
Yeah.
But you build up a picture.
Shimamura did that with students in editing, like you mentioned about editing, and they asked them to place the point where they think an edit should go, where you should switch from that shot to this shot. And they were able to find that they would choose a point because it just felt right, it seemed intuitive. But then later they'd realised there was some overlap, and that it actually made sense from a perceptual point of view, the way we process the information. And they talk about that kind of edit blindness, that when we change from one shot to another, there needs to be a little bit of overlap, like you kind of go back in time a little bit because of our perceptual systems. So there's some research which looks at this. I love the idea of exploring the reasons for their choices and trying to figure out about expertise that way.
Right, did that change with expertise?
What's that?
Did that change with expertise?
It has actually been looked at. So they used film students, I think, because that's who he had access to.
Yeah, so it'd be really interesting to see, did that change as they became professional editors?
It
Or
would be really interesting to look at that sort of stuff. Sorry, I interrupted.
There was
Yes, I did have a question, thanks. I was just interested in your experiment before, the fact that you are using animation. And my colleague and student here, Shane, is doing a small study looking at young children and their attitudes to children with disabilities, and a specific disability, Down syndrome. And we're doing a bit like Ailish said, we have an example of a cartoon where the main character has Down syndrome, and we're looking at before and after. It's beautifully done. Lovely study. But I suppose my question is, would we get, or is there any research that says, would you get a different result if you had real life footage with real actors And then you get into this thing of, is it Ralph Fiennes in The English Patient, or who is it? And you bring a whole lot of characteristics, with whatever actor is playing. Is there a research base that looks at the same footage through animation and through, I don't even know how to say it, real life?
Live action.
Live action, yeah. Is there an evidence base around that?
I know one study that compared the live action film and the equivalent animation. It was a brain study, but I couldn't tell the result. But there is, I can find it quite easily. I think it really depends on your dependent variables and the target audience, whether it's a relevant difference. I think in terms of theory of mind, it's not. Like if you just think of the Heider and Simmel squares and circles running around, that can trigger theory of mind responses. So I think everything can trigger which resembles a bit to human being and human motion. I think with children, animation is a better choice, but it's just my intuitive answer.
Can I just ask, is there any literature on whether it says it's experienced the same way as if it were real life or animation?
Sorry again?
Is there any literature on whether the interaction, whether it's through animation or through just real life, are they experienced the same way?
I don't know. I haven't read any studies on that,
Okay.
but it doesn't mean anything.
I know some, not on animation or real life, but some where they'll frame live action stuff as either documentary or fictional. There's a few of those which might help you build an argument in that direction, but I don't know if there's any direct comparisons between animation and real life.
I want to just go back to talking about the music. You mentioned music there, about the intensity of the music and so on. I haven't read anything about it, but I assume there is literature on this. But you know, there's this way how when you watch TV or something now, the music is quite manipulative. When the music plays, you immediately know what you're supposed to feel.
Yeah.
Okay, so has there been any work on looking at how that relates to this idea of a theory of mind, that people just get the cue from the music, and we know the swelling violins mean I'm supposed to feel sad now, or you know, that the music gets really fast and I'm supposed to feel excited, and therefore the character must feel that way. You know, is there work on that relating to theory of mind?
I haven't found any in relation to theory of mind in specific. I found like emotional intensity in general and certain emotions, and there is a study that investigated where to put the music, like before the character appears on the screen, or when or after, but not to theory of mind. But it's a very relevant question, and all my reviewers who read the first version of the paper, that was the first critique, that the music can convey emotional message as well.
I'm just curious, this may be way out of left field, but have you seen any research that looks at other variables, such as I recently had the experience of going on some of these rides at Universal, and the whole physical, how they add the physical effects, like the chair moving or wind coming or whatever, to a three-dimensional film, and what that does in terms of these kinds of effects. Is that something you're exploring, or have you seen any research on that?
Brendan's expertise?
Yeah, part of my PhD was looking at the differences between 2D film and 3D film and its effect on physiological responses. There's very little on those added, what's called 4D experiences. The problem with them is sometimes they're very token, so that they serve just to remind you that you're in a fabricated or fictional experience, and that a lot of the stuff that Kathy's been talking about, and a lot of the really successful techniques in all sorts of filmmaking and games, is to hide themselves, so that the best techniques are the ones that go unnoticed, like an edit or when that music comes in. It's important that you didn't notice it too much, that it was unconscious. And so sometimes if they're done right and they're done in an appropriate way where they can increase how immersed you are in the experience, often they serve to just remind you that
The
you're...
opposite.
Yeah. And things like roller coaster are so immersive or overwhelming that they tend to... you forget quickly that it's not real. Yeah, so but there is little done. and
So
something
those
I'm
kinds of
interested in.
things then work against the whole theory of mind and progress, because they cross a line, is that the idea?
They could, yeah. And so one of the
Okay.
things we're looking at is how the viewer has a role to play in finding their appropriate kind of level of engagement, and the media itself has a role to play. And by trying to disentangle the contribution of those different factors, we can find that it's quite an individual thing. Someone might, hate horror films, but they don't mind that one because it wasn't really a horror. And so there's that kind of interaction between the viewer and the experience. So a lot of the time they can take away from the experience, but someone might just love them for that reason.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there is a theory on that. It's in film theory. In film theory, it's called emotional markers, like the wind and the color, and like that just imply a certain mood or a certain emotion, but not explicitly.
So it's interesting how music, which is another sense, maybe because I suppose we're so, I don't know the reasons
Yes.
why, but how you can add that sense in and it doesn't cross that line, but these others do.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Okay.
I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, to the extent I think sometimes where now if you see something without music, it's noticeable.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
watch
it
it,
is,
there's no
yeah.
music in it. There's something wrong with this and it feels very staged. Why is that? And because there isn't an extra artificial layer, which actually makes it feel more artificial.
They made the scene from the end of the Return of the Jedi or one of the third Star Wars film. They've done it with no music.
Oh,
It's awkward to watch. It's this kind of ending where there's a big celebration and it's silent. It's really funny.
Yeah, actually, like it reminds me of a very interesting finding that withdrawing information sometimes generates more intense responses, and it relates to theory of mind. There was a study that compared literature to literature with lots of information of the emotional state of the characters, with another where they just removed this information. It was with children actually, and what they found that after the study, children who read the story with lots of emotional information, their vocabulary increased. But when they went to the false belief test, where they actually had to perform, those who read the no information text, those performed much better. And the explanation was that when you don't have the information, you have to generate it yourself. You have to infer much more about what's going on in the character's mind, and that like trains you to use this capability because the information is not given. So that's why we can't really predict what will happen with our close-ups, whether more close-up will improve theory of mind or less close-up will improve theory of mind. Maybe in film it works differently, but in literature it's a very interesting finding, and it makes sense if you think of literary literature compared to popular literature. I think the biggest difference is that you have to construct the story, you have to be more active, you have to make a bigger effort to make sense of the storyline and the characters' mental states. So it's worth reading literary stuff.
Thanks everyone, and I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank
I do.
Katalin Bálint.